I recently had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Dr. Stuart Eisendrath about his book, When Antidepressants Aren't Enough, Harnessing the Power of Mindfulness to Alleviate Depression. I hope that you'll enjoy the interview. Tell us about your book, When Antidepressants Aren't Enough, and what inspired you to write it.
Well, I was inspired to write it because we found that many people who take antidepressants actually only get a partial response. So in the largest study to investigate this was the STAR-D trial, which looked at giving people 12 weeks of an antidepressant, and after that they found that only 30% of those people were in remission. Then they were given a second trial of another antidepressant for 12 weeks, so a total of 24 weeks, and only 50% of them were in remission. So that means 50% weren't and were not fully recovered. So we wanted to develop a treatment technique that would help those other people recover more completely. And that was the impetus for starting the PATH-D program, which is Practicing Alternatives to Heal Depression study, that was sponsored by the National Institute of Health, and we carried on for almost the past 10 years.
And what are some things that you discovered in that research?
Well, we discovered that people liked to find a technique that was self-empowering. So it was something that they could do on their own and didn't need a therapist with them all the way, all the time, and that they could learn the techniques within an 8-week period and make substantial changes in their depression levels, their anxiety levels, their rumination levels, and their self-compassion. So it was a very helpful technique in a fairly brief period of time.
What you were teaching them is called Mindfulness-Based cognitive therapy.
Correct.
Correct? And will you tell us what that looks like in a practical sense?
Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is a blend of the ancient practice of mindfulness meditation that really started with Buddhism about 2,500 years ago, and blends it with some aspects of cognitive therapy to teach people a technique that they can use every day on their own. People learn to focus their attention in a certain way so that they can have control over what their mind is really paying attention to at any one point in time.
It sounds like this is really giving people who are suffering from depression the tools they need to shift things themselves versus just only throwing medicine at it where they may not have any perspective.
That's right. That this teaches people techniques that they can use on their own, either with medication or without medication. Long-term antidepressants, for some people, may be very helpful and perhaps even life-saving at times, but in other instances, it appears like it's less helpful and in fact may set up patterns where the person is staying on the medication where they don't really need to, but having trouble getting off the medication on their own.
You say in the book that negative thoughts are not facts, but they're rather symptoms of depression itself. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. In depression, we find that there are certain common thoughts that almost everybody who's depressed has. In fact, it's been tabulated into a table of the 30 most common symptoms of thoughts that a person has. And so if I was to give you a list of the 30 and you were depressed, you'd probably pick out your top 10, like Letterman's top 10 of what are your thoughts. And they're not unique to you. Like, for example, I'm not a good person. I'll always be a failure. I won't be as good as my friend. I'm poor at everything. Everything turns out to be a mess for me. I'll never finish anything. Those kinds of thoughts are really symptoms of depression. But it's a little tricky because not only are they symptoms of depression, but they also work in a circular way to drive depression. So if you have the thought that I'm a bad person, it's going to make you feel more depressed. And that way it's a circle, so that you have a negative thought, it makes you feel more depressed, and depression itself generates more negative thoughts.
And how does mindfulness-based cognitive therapy help people start to shift their relationship with those thoughts?
It breaks that circle so that people who are using mindfulness-based cognitive therapy are able to start looking at those thoughts. For example, if you say, I'm a bad person, we teach them to say, I'm having the thought I'm a bad person, which is slightly different, but powerfully so, because they can recognize that it's just a thought. So that alone has an antidepressant effect. And they start to learn, like when I have the thought I'm a bad person, it really is similar to other thoughts they might have, like I have the thought I'm hungry right now and I'm looking forward to lunch. But it's a thought I'm having, and it doesn't have to be a proven fact. So if you have the thought I'm a bad person, it is not a fact. It's a thought you're having. And once you start to recognize that it's a thought, you're able to sort of have distance from it, what we call decenter from it. So if you take this and say, this is a table, that's a fact. But if you say I'm a bad person, that's not a fact. You may say I'm a good person, and somebody else may say I'm a good person. And so it makes me have a little looser picture of myself as whether I'm a good or bad person.
What advice do you have to offer someone who's interested in starting a mindfulness practice with the intention of healing from depression?
Well, I think in that instance, it's really helpful for the person to have some organized way of doing so. And they might do it by taking a class on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And you can Google classes in your area. And in the book, there's a website that I know that has classes listed worldwide that actually has places that offer it. Or you can use a book like When Antidepressants Aren't Enough. That actually offers the full program of both the information, the written information, but also the guided meditations that go along with the course that are available for streaming or for downloading. So by reading the book, and especially doing it over an 8-week period, you can acquire most of the information that you'd get from taking a live course.
That's great. Yeah. And what do you most hope that readers will take away from your book?
Well, I hope that they'll learn that, first of all, having an episode of depression is not a personal failing, and that it's an illness like anything else, and that they themselves can do something to treat it. They don't have to be helpless. And that in itself is antidepressant, because one of the thoughts you have in depression is, I'm helpless to do anything about it, and I'm hopeless that anybody can help me. And if you can counter those by realizing the techniques that we teach in the book are something you can use to counter depression, you can be that much further ahead in alleviating depression, so that when depression hits, you're able to take some steps yourself that will help you.